Hello guys, my name is Diego Pacheco and this will be another slidecast. Today we will do the part 2 of management doing the non-obvious. In part 1 I cover several non-traditional ideas and I basically rely on more than 20 books and I recommend the 20 books for you guys. And today I'm gonna continue on non-traditional ideas, and this will be the second part. So if you didn't watch the first part, I highly recommend you watch it. And in this second part, I'm gonna also recommend um, 20 more books, right? So in the two series, you have a recommendation of 40 books, right? So let's get started with this slidecast. So you cannot regulate failure. Let that sink it in for a moment, right? So there's two amazing books that talk about failure and anti-fragility, which is anti-fragile, which is a series of 6 books, and there is drifting into failure, right, which is another awesome book. And these books are not only awesome for chaos engineering or testing in production, but they're awesome because of management, right? And this is the very interesting way to think about it, right? So what you want to have is a strong mentality. You don't want to have like a flaw mentality. And the problem is we have this flaw mentality that we can regulate things, that we can predict all possible outcomes, we can predict all possible failure modes, right? And it doesn't work like that, all right? And we can know the probability of something happens, that's true, but we cannot precisely say when will happen, all right? So it's really hard to predict failure. And then there's this different philosophies, this different way to deal with failure, which is like a hydra. So the anti-fragility is all about a hydra, right? So fragility, anyone knows what's fragility, is easy to break, right? And like a glass, right? So easily can break. But resiliency often is the wrong terminology, right? And I always try to avoid the word resiliency. And I know that in distributed systems and software, we always use the word resilience. But the problem with resiliency is you have a state and you never change that state, right? So either resilience is something like you are anti-fragile because you don't have changes, right? It's like saying, oh, I have a CI/CD pipeline and I never deploy in production. If I never deploy in production, I can never break production. So look, I'm resilient, right? So resilience is really the wrong way to think about it. And what you want to think about is really anti-fragility. And anti-fragility is, yes, there will be deploying productions, there will be changes, but I will recover from that changes. And this, right, the best metaphor is like a hydra, right? Where, you chop one of the head, another head pops up, right? So you recover from failure. And that's the whole idea. And that's not only, like I said, about chaos engineering or testing in production, but also it's really about innovation and really about culture, right? So we need to have a different mentality. And on these books like Drift to Failure and Anti-Fragile, they talk about like how models, sometimes people have like financial models, or they have models about trying to predict stuff, and these models, they always are sort of abstractions, right? And when we create abstraction of something, you really miss things, right? And so really the bottom line is like regulations do not work with complex systems, right? You cannot regulate a complex system. You need to be able to deal with the failure, right? That's the thing, right? So if we think about it, society is all about complexity, right? We have all these different countries, different religions, different sexual orientations, different political inclinations. We are completely different, and that's cool and awesome, right? But at the same time, when we look in the videos, they are trying to look for linearity, right? And that's not how it works. But so that's the first thing. You cannot regulate failure. You need to embrace failure, right? Now, this is something very interesting about product manager, or shall I say project manager, maybe, right? So there is this awesome book called Empowered by Martin Kagan, and there's other cool books like Jobs to be Done, and Sprint, Forever Empowerable. They're all like designer books, right? And the Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. But like, especially on the Kagan book, right, about empowerment, he basically says that, most of companies do not have a product strategy. And think about that for a moment, right? That something might sound completely crazy, right? Well, why? How you don't have a product strategy? Well, what Kagan is saying is like, you don't have a product strategy because your product strategy is pretty much pleasing the business, right? You just do whatever the business want, right? And that's not a product strategy. So what Kagan says in empowerment is that most of the companies, they have future teams. They don't have product teams because these teams are future factories. They just build features like crazy, right? And and the issue of feature teams is like, they have the solution already, right? Because the business already know the solution. So there's nothing to be discovered. It's just to be executed, all right? And that's right, is a very linear way to think. Well, my business have the answers. I just need to execute, right? Well, it doesn't work like that, right? Remember, the world is complex. Teams are complex, and that doesn't work at all, right? So this is a very flawed mentality, right? And now we start to connecting things. And basically what Kagan says is like, sometimes when you have too much domain knowledge, like you know too much about the business, that becomes a liability. Think about that for a moment, right? Knowing too much about the business becomes a liability because you start to thinking like the customer, and you start to thinking like you are the customer, which is much worse, right? You are not the customer. Even if you know the business for like 30, 40, 50 years, you are not the customer. You're never gonna be the customer. And that's really dangerous, right? So again, it all goes down to complex thinking and to failure, right? Do you think you can predict what people will want for 50 years? No one can do that. It doesn't work like that, right? So it's much better to share the vision of the product rather than the roadmap. Because when you share a roadmap of a product, a customer might be buying your product because of that roadmap. And in that case, you're kind of constrained because now you cannot change anything on the roadmap because, you're going to impact your customers. So that's why several companies, they do not share their roadmaps, right? Because, that does not give you space and runway for do maneuvers. And you are in a waterfall, right, project because of that. So sharing roadmaps is evil, right? You should have roadmaps, but do not share your roadmaps. And several companies do not do that. And the bottom line here that Kagan is saying, it is, we need a different mentality. We need to see technology and product in a different way. And the product organization is actually an IT organization. They're not doing product manager. They're doing project management, right? And that's bad and wrong. Okay, so Kagan also says that product vision is a leap of faith, and this is so awesome, right? And again, it's all linked to complex systems and to failure, right? Because why is a leap of faith? Because you cannot regulate a complex system. In other words, there's no model that's gonna work. In other words, you don't know the future. You cannot predict the future. So it's all about faith. So a product vision is about faith, right? You need to have this leap of faith. So you can validate if a need exists, but you cannot validate the solution because you didn't build the solution, right? So you can only test for the demand. You can never test for the solution. So one way to show the vision of the product, right, and transfer that and make sure that everybody understands the vision is to use storyboarding, right? Because storyboarding focuses on emotion. It might be much better way to share the product vision. And sometimes people want to show the product vision by roadmaps and futures. And that's the wrong way to see the product vision. So a good product manager, and it's not project manager, right, creates the owner feeling. So it empowers the team, and the teams are, and Kagan says this like every 2 or 4 words. He say that missionaries, not mercenaries, right? He says that like all the time on the book, and that's the thing, right? You want to create this honor, right? You want to empower people so they can discover things. You don't want to give the solution to them. You want to give the problem, right? So innovation thrives, you know, when people think differently, and that's why you need to have diversity. And Kagan is really harsh on cultural fit, because cultural fit, in other words, is saying, well, let's get people who think exactly like us and are exactly like us and do exactly like us. Awesome, you're never gonna do anything different, right? But your competitors will. So be careful. There's this huge trend when you're gonna hire someone, you look for cultural fit. And actually, you want to have the misfits there. You really want to have the misfits. Not only because Misfits is a very awesome punk rock band, but because you want to have this diversity effect, right? You want to have people thinking differently, right? Because again, you cannot predict the future. You cannot regulate the future. It's not linear. It's a complex system. Keep that in mind. So now, sharing vision, not roadmaps, right? So if the customer buy your product because there's a feature in roadmap, it's much hard to change your tactics, right? So what happens is that even people saying they have discovery, they don't have discovery because it's all tactical, it's all delivery and execution. Even if you have designers there or you are doing design thinking or doing design research, but you're actually not changing anything because you have the answers for the problems. So that's tactical, that's not strategical. And the more details you commit, the more gonna be hard to change. So sharing roadmaps, in other words, is waterfall, all right? It creates waterfall because, you know, and also this is flawed because the product organization might have this vision that, oh, if I have a pressure, I'm gonna have results. And that's, again, is a very linear way to think. It doesn't work like that, right? So you need to change that. You need to stop sharing roadmaps, right? That's really, really evil. Now, mistakes are desirable, right? If you think about what I'm saying, right? Anti-fragility. You want to kill the head of the Hydra, a new head shall pop up. So if I don't have failure, I don't have innovation, right? Because if I'm not failing, I'm not trying anything different. If I'm not trying anything different, how am I gonna innovate, right? So it's completely normal to have failure. And if you look, big Silicon Valley companies like Amazon, like Google, they fail a lot. They're always failing. And failure is desirable. It should be celebrated. Failure is normal, right? But listen to this. What people do is like they always want to blame one person for the failure. And that's wrong thinking because, again, that goes to the linear think, that Newtonian think, that you can predict the future, and you think you can understand completely the complex system, and you can precisely say exactly what tip out the whole thing. It doesn't work like that. It's not one variable. It's hundreds of variables, all right? So it doesn't work like that. So that's really flawed way to think. You cannot fix the problem by firing one person. So in this other book, Don Norman, that talks on the book The Design of Everyday Things, he says that, you know, this idea of human error, that you can blame a human, right, is always an intern who did the problem, right? And human error, and Don says all the time that there's no such a thing as human error. It's always a design error. And if it's a design error, it's a system error, right? So it's all about the system. So most of new innovations, they fail, and that's fine, all right? Because people are not ready for disrupted innovation. So good disrupted innovation takes time, takes a long time. And we're gonna talk more about that later on. So now let's talk about some fault cognitive biases, all right? So this is from the book Think Fast, Think Slow. So this is pretty cool, all right? So think about this. You have a bat, like a baseball bat, right? And then you have a ball. And if you buy the bat and the ball, the combo, let's say you pay $1.10, right? And if I tell you the bat is $1 more than the ball, so and then I ask you this, okay, so how much cost the ball? And right away you say, well, if the ball and the bat is 1 and 10, and the bat is 1 more, right, than the ball, so the ball is 10, correct? Wrong, because if the ball was 10 and the bat is 1 more, then the bat will be 110 and then will be 120, and that's completely wrong. So the right answer is that the ball is 0.05 because then the bet is 105 plus 0.5, we're gonna get 110. And why we get in this trap? Because our brain, it really doesn't work well with statistics, because that's in our slow system. So we have two systems. We have a fast system and we have a slow system. And several things we need to use a slow part of our brain. And if you want to do it fast, we're gonna do it wrong. So we need to do it slow. And there's a huge relation with complex systems here, because we tend to view everything as a Newtonian view of the world, that everything is simple and everything can be fixed like that. It doesn't work like that. And there are biases that, that are kind of hardwired in our brain that make us go in this wrong direction. Like, for instance, in this book, the author talk about three biases. All right. So one bias is frequent exposure. So the best option, or just the option that you see more often. All right. And they say on the book, like, well, if you want to have a lie and you want that lie became a true, what you do, you keep repeating that lie over and over, and then becomes a true. But why? Because we have this bias in our brain called frequent exposure, that if you are exposed too much to something, right, I'm not even saying it's true, right or wrong, but if we are exposed to that for so long, we start to believe in it, we start to favor that thing, right? And that's the frequent exposure, right? And that's bad, because waterfall is everywhere, project manager is everywhere, this Newtonian mentality is everywhere, so we believe this is true because we have a bias that goes against us, right? So that's the first bias. The second bias is about status quo. So in status quo, we have loss aversion and endowment effect, all right? So this is a trap, all right? By the past, what am I losing by doing that? So we have this feeling that we feel lost much more than winning. We are afraid of loss 2 times rather than winning. We are like 1 time. So we were like double afraid of losing than winning, right? And that's really something that goes against us and then make us kind of against innovation. And the third thing is called tunnel vision. YWSIATI. What you see is what is all there, right? So, I'm seeing, I see everything. There's nothing that I'm missing. So that's why I don't need to do discover, because I have all the answers. The system is simple, it's linear, it's Newtonical. It doesn't work like that. So this kind of a tunnel vision, all right, put us in a sort of a tunnel, and then, we don't think anymore. We just go straight to the tunnel, all right? So be careful. Just because you're not seeing, it doesn't mean it's not there, all right? So you need to be aware of these cognitive biases. You need to fight them, and you need to always think, okay, this is my fast brain thinking or is my slow brain thinking? Am I getting all the things here correctly, right? So that's something very important. Now, lots of people believe that management is needed mostly when you have more interdependencies. The more interdependencies you need, the more management you need, all right? And I'm not saying that you should have zero management, all right? But I'm saying that in this way of thinking, like, management is really about coordination, right? It's really about the blank spots. And the more you have, the more independence the manager will need, right? That's true if you don't have the right culture. For instance, if you have an SOA culture where you have services and that services are isolated, you actually don't need to be coordinating things with everybody. If you have a self-service model where people can self-serve, they don't need to do meetings to do everything. And if you have automation, things happen in automated fashion, and you treat people like a grown-ups, you have a good talent density, you don't need that many supervision and coordination, right? So be careful, all right, because that idea, right, also might show that your system is flawed, that your system is not resilient enough for the scale. Now, it's really all about psychological safety. This is a concept from 990. I personally learned it from Google, but there's a new book here called Unicorn Project. Is the latest book of Ginny King, one of the DevOps wizards. And the whole idea about psychological safety is, first, you work to include people, so you are in the included. Then, it's safe to learn. Then it's safe to contribute. And finally, it's safe to challenge the status quo. In other words, for me, it's just about not having politics, right? And not playing politics with people, and working to build awesome projects, awesome products, and not necessarily empire building, right? So psychological safety is the foundation for DevOps, is the foundation for innovation, because you need to be able to challenge things. There's lots of company, if you challenge things, they take it personally, they take it bad. You cannot challenge anything, then you just really pleasing the business. You just really playing politics, and there's no way innovation will flourish on this scenario. Now, this is my new favorite word. It's called the Fragilitas, right? I just love the word. I'm gonna say it again, the Fragilitas. So if you go to that book, I don't remember if this is from Drift to Failure or it's Anti-Fragile, but this is so beautiful. Like, you cannot calculate risk and probabilities of rare events, right? Look, the pandemic that we are here. You cannot say exactly when we're gonna happen, right? So Fragilistas are people who just think linearly like Newton and don't see the big picture. They don't have anti-fragility, they don't understand complex systems, and they're often doing wrong things. So a fragilista, they believe in this myth that you can plan can help you, because of course you can plan. The system is linear, you can predict what you're gonna happen. So as long as you plan everything in a Gantt project of 5 years, or a roadmap that you do everything that's there, you're definitely gonna get it, right? Because everything is linear, you have control of everything. That's all wrong. You don't have control of anything, all right? So, and also, to have control, it means you don't have randomness, right? You don't have variation, and Lean is all about variation. And variation, in some sense, is bad, but in other sense is good, because variation is diversity, variation is randomness, and randomness is what allows us to innovate, right? If you don't have randomness, for sure you're gonna have a guaranteed death. And these fragilistas, they believe in models. They believe they can predict anything. And then the author goes on and on of examples of fragilistas, like the medical fragilista that denied, our body has ability to heal, and the doctor doesn't see this, or that think that drugs don't have side effects, or the political or the politic fragilista that see economy as a washing machine, or the financial fragilista that use risk models that destroy the bank system. So every plane crash brings us close to safety, and that's one of the cool things about the aviation industry. There's lots of bad things there, but that's definitely, this is a cool thing, that every time a crash happens, that makes things more secure, because they run root cause analysis, right? That's something that's pretty much about Lean. You're gonna find that on the Unicorn Project, you're gonna find that on the DevOps handbook, you're gonna find that even I don't remember if it was on Kagan book or Design Sprint, or but one of these other design books, they're also talking about that. And pretty much the key, right, is to discover the root cause of something. But sometimes people are really fast to discover the root cause. Oh, blame that person, that's the root cause. No, that's why there are techniques like 5 whys, and root causes take a long time to figure out if you really want to understand the real root cause, right? If you're fast getting answers for root cause, you might be being too fast, right? And if you are being too fast, you might be in your brain system 1, you're not be seeing the big picture, you're not really, capturing what's going on. So you might be being a fragilista, and don't be a fragilista. So this is another pearl, right? It says, do not please your boss. And you're gonna see this on Netflix books. There's Powerful, and there's No Rules. And also in Kagan's last book, he also goes on and on about that, and he goes even beyond to say, not only do not please your boss, but do not please your business. So Netflix, always say this: don't try to please your boss. In Empowerment, he says, don't please your business, because that's the wrong product strategy. And then the thing you need to think about it is, Are you on like in innovation mode, or you are in empire building mode? All right, do you want to build power and have people and just power, or do you really want to build something, right? So does your boss has a product mentality or a project mentality? Is your boss like micromanaging you, or it's kind of coaching you and help you to grow and teaching you and share your vision? All right, so there's two kinds of bosses here. So what Kagan says is like strong companies, strong product teams, they work towards purpose, right? And their purpose is to build, you know, products that customers love. And that's not only about Martin Kagan, but I see Y Combinator really goes over and over about this, that, your real goal is to build products that people love. And most of the companies, they do not empower product teams, right? Because they are future teams. And again, future teams doesn't work because we are a complex system, there's failure and everything that I'm talking so far. So one other thing is that we live in an attention economy, right? So it is all about social media. It is a marketing theory. And what happens is like people really need attention, not really necessary negative feedback. And attention can be delivered in one-on-ones, for instance, right? So attention is not just doing meetings, right? And keep in mind that meetings really is not a way to scale anything, right? You need to have a sync work to scale. So this is really, really awesome thing. It came from a book called 9 Lies About Work. This book is a masterpiece. I recommend you read it. So people don't need negative feedback. People need attention. Often feedback is bad. It's not bad feedback. Feedback is bad itself, right? It's wrong, it's not clear, it's bad structure. It really doesn't help, right? So positive feedback, there are some studies, and if you read this book 9 Lines About Work, they talk about that positive feedback can be 30 times more effective, right? So why we focus on our weakness rather than focusing on our strengths, right? So people are unique, and that's not a bug, that's a future, right? That's a future. So we need to stop trying to box people, right? And ask them to be the same. We need to embrace diversity. So competency models in HR are all wrong because there's the hater idiocracy. The hater pretty much is like projecting himself, and we cannot proper evaluate people, right? We just can't, all right? So, but constructive and good feedback is needed. Netflix talk about this on the A4, right? And I personally believe, if you should be able to drop some bad feedback, and sometimes appreciation and constructive feedback is always useful. So identity and habits, right? So basically your habits transform your identity, and your identity is built by your habits. This is from James Clear, Atomic Habits, right? So basically what James says is that habits in Latin means repeating self. So over time, small choices are compound, and they either results in good or bad results, right? So there's a compounding effect, and you should be much more worried about your trajectory, your direction, rather than your results. So you get what you repeat. So mastery require patience. And if you think about game, for instance, a good game is easy to play, is easy to learn, but it's hard to master, like any good things in life. So results are much more about the systems that you have, the habits, than the goals, objectives. So a goal, the long term is about to be goalless thinking, all right? And true behavior change is identity change. You became your behavior. So if you don't shift your beliefs behind, the change will be really hard. And your habits is how we embody our identity, right? And therefore loss of behavior change. You want to make it obvious, you want to make it attractive, you want to make it easy and satisfying. So ability to keep going even when it's boring, this is success, right? So success is boring. So small improvements stacking over time creates a lot of benefits, right? So really, when we always think about transformation, we always think about process, right? So everything we see is process, but there's something else that's mindsets and habits, right? And this, they have much more power. So it's also all about discipline. So I always believe that Agile was about discipline, all right? And turns out that Agile is the basis for DevOps and for digital transformation. And, there's this book about why digital transformations fail from Tony Saldanha, where he says that 70% of all digital transformations fail because there's lack of discipline to execute transformations, right? So discipline often fades on short term, right? Because that happens for so many reasons, right? Maybe because you don't have a talent pool, or maybe because you don't have an operational boundary tied to what you're doing, like you're just doing paperwork or email or wikis, and you know what? If you don't update email or paperwork or wiki, the world moves on. But if you have boundaries that are automated, then you cannot really run away from that, right? So if you for instance, if you want to create a GitHub repository and you need to run a Jenkins job, right? And that Jenkins job, when creates the GitHub repositories, also fulfill a catalog, your catalog always going to be up to date. But if you manually need to trigger the job and go up to date the wiki, you might not get the wiki updated at some point, right? So that's why one key thing to deal with discipline is to have things tied to operational bounding, right? Operational capabilities. And that's really all about automation, and it's really about self-service culture, right? So forget process, right? You should focus on grow up. So we need to think about this, right? So why the heck do we need to have process for everything? Why do we need to review everything? So can we scale this way? Is this sane? Is this make sense? Right? So Steve Jobs once said that it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do, right? And Kagan in Empowerment says, a good, strong product leadership, it creates the owner feeling on people and let they figure out the solution, all right? So are we treating people as grown-ups, right? The Netflix goat is over and over and powerful and no rules, where basically, it say, well, let's treat people like grown-ups, right? And let's improve our talent density. And what really boils down to, and Kagan also goes on about this on Empowered, is about, how do your company see themselves? Do they see them as a technology company? Most of companies don't see themselves as a technology company. And they basically think technology is an expense. Technology is a means to an end. And actually, technology is the business, no matter if you are fintech, healthcare, HR, or retail, or auto, or aviation, wherever. Technology is really the core. Look, COVID nowadays, right? And when you see technology as expense, then you have these mentalities, right, that are really broken, and you end up focusing in process, and you forget about your talent density, and you need to think differently. You need to think about, okay, I'm gonna empower people, and I'm gonna treat people as grown-ups. So in this other book called Loonshots, which is very amazing book, the author talks about artists and soldiers, that to innovate you need to have artists. You need to have guys that are misfits, that are the crazy ones, that are always thinking out of the box. But you also need to have soldiers that will take care of every single detail and make sure that execution happens. And you need to have both. And in Loonshots, the author says that you need to kind of make these groups to talk together, to exchange ideas. And this is pretty much, to me, about DTA and TTA, right? So DTA from Martin Kagan as well, where you have the discover and the deliver, and these two things feed each other. The problems that we have nowadays on the industry, that discover is deliver as well. It's not really discover, right? So we don't really have artists there, and we're not really doing discover work. We're doing delivery work there. Yeah, that's really a metaphor to think about it in a way to work. So in this book about Loonshots, the author asked these questions. Okay, so why teams destroy innovations, right? And I personally believe that, every time you have people, you have this kind of, this effect, right? And he talks about this as well, like phase transitions, right? But some people call it, oh, you're empire building, right? You just want to do politics, right? But this happens after some threshold. So the author says that the size of the group is critical, right? And for me, I will be honest, right? I never like the Dunbar thing where you say, oh, 15 people is the maximum number of people you can trust. That's why you have small teams, right? I always have some issues with that. And I personally think that this author explanation is just much better, right? He says that the issue is when you start to having more people, right, is that they have a phase transition and the mentality change. And when a group reaches some threshold, the group start to think in a different way. And that's something really, really cool, right? And the author talk about these two competing forces that go into opposite directions, right? So you have stake and outcome and perks and hanks, right? So stake and outcome is like, okay, so when the group is small and I do something that could be huge on outcome. But when you have a big company, right, and your team gonna do something, that might be like 1% on the whole Titanic that's the company. So you hardly move the needle, so why bother, right? So your stake of outcome might be very small, but your perks might be really big. So maybe because you please your boss or say something correct, you might get promoted, right? And that's your so you see, you kind of try to focus on perks because you want to get promoted, not necessarily want to innovate. And when you have like a small company, it's the opposite, right? You have very little perks, but the staking outcome is huge, right? And that's why you want to have teams smalls, right? Because of this effect. And I just found this brilliant. And basically your focus change from project and outcomes to politics and promotion, right? Once you reach some threshold, and people stop at the water cooler or the coffee machine and discuss promotion paths and what it takes to get there, right? When great teams will start killing great ideas, right? So that's why sizing became a problem, and the teams became like antibodies. It's all because of politics. So people need to love your nose, all right? So there's this book called Boundaries. I personally like the book a lot. Is the book that talk really about relationships. It's going more like in marital things. The author is a Christian, right? I don't have problems, but you know, it's a bit preachy, but it's really good book. And one of the things that the author says is that people need to love your nose. If people just love your yeses, this relationship is problematic, right? Then they really don't love you, or they really, you know, this relationship is not really a win-win for everybody. So people need to love your nose. And he says that boundary issues started on childhood and often based on a relationship between the parent and the kid, all right? So the author says that it's really important to say what you think, all right? Is important. Let's say, oh, this is important for you, it might not be important for me. And when boundaries is all about, you know, setting rules, and setting rules can result in good boundaries, right? So one thing that the author says is like owning your feelings but respecting others. And he give an example like of a mother where the daughter, you know, gonna spend the Christmas with the friends, and then the mother says, well, I'm hurt. I would prefer to have you with Christmas with me, right? But at the same time, go have fun with your friends. So this means, you know, not only you are owning your feelings, but you're respecting other feelings, right? And that's really the place to be, the high maturity place. And then what the author says is that often what we do is actually the opposite, right? We keep the bad in and the good out, right? So this is really amazing book about relationships. I highly recommend you guys take a look. So there is this book from Don Norman, The Designs of Everyday Things. There is Jobs to be Done. There is Design Sprint. There is Empowered, where they talk about signifiers, right? And there's this other book that talk about joy, right? That I'm gonna recommend at the end. It talks about real joy, and I was thinking about these two different things, and you know, getting some insights. And basically, what some author says that signifiers, right, is like one of the key concepts in design, like a button that you put on a screen to save something. That's a signifier, right? And the author said that signifiers is also sort of a plumage, right? So if you think about companies have perks, right? So, oh, I have a football machine, or have a water cooler, or coffee machine, or gym, or whatever. And the author says that this is like plumage. This is just short-term focus, all right? And this, given some time, will fade, all right? Will just fade. And on this other book about joy, is really interesting book that says that happiness is a skill and you can learn. And I will be honest, I never thought that happiness as a skill. And basically the author says that the ability to control your ego comes from mindfulness, so to really understand what's going on. And one thing I like a lot, and I think there's relation with feedback as well, the author says that my emotions are not me. My thoughts are not me. My actions are not me. If I had a bad day, that's not me. And that's so cool. On the previous section of this non-traditional management slidecast, I was talking about a book called Thanks for the Feedback. And also, there's this book about 9 lies about work, where this has this idea that, and also if you look like in James Clear about the atomic habits, that um, like sometimes we have issues to accept feedback because we attach ourselves with our identity. Like if I do one thing, that's me, right? And you are much more than what you do. And this goes exactly on that same direction. That's why I kind of like it. And the author says that you can be happy even suffering. And the author goes even on and says stuff like, well, if you are unhappy, let's say in median class, if you get rich, you're not necessarily gonna get more happier, right? So the author says that's really, happiness is a skill you need to learn. And in order to go there, he says that, the mind has a normal state, which is calmness and steadiness, and you want to reach that state. And when you meditate, that's all about letting go some thoughts, right, and starting to enjoy the present, right? So it's really cool book. You should take a look. It's really cool. So that's it for today, guys. I want to show the books that was the basis of this idea. So Drifting to Failure and Anti-Fragile, really awesome books about anti-fragility, about innovation, about management culture, right? Embracing failure and being a hydra. Boundaries, really good book about relationships. Think Fast and Think Slow goes about the statistical thinking and why it's important, to think slow and don't be fooled by our cognitive biases. Grit is also a book about leadership and say that effort is much more important than talent. There's no such a thing as talent. The Design of Everyday Things is a cool book about design, but it also, I would say, is a good book about architecture, right? There is some interesting insights there. Long Shots is an amazing book about innovation and that talks about these ideas of artists and soldiers. Empowered, amazing books about modern product organizations from Kagan. 9 Lies About Work, really a masterpiece. Just read it. Atomic Habits, like talk about habits as a way to change, and also cool. Jobs to Be Done in Sprint and Forever Employable are design books. Joy and Demand is the book I was mentioned about, like happiness being a skill and you master it. DevOps Handbook, Accelerate, and Unicorn Project are DevOps books that Gene Keen wrote. Powerful is a first book for Netflix from the former VP of HR. New Economics is a Deming book. That talk about vision of companies, and why digital transformations fail from Tony Saldanha talks all about leadership, and I also mentioned that on the presentation. So that's it for today. I hope you guys like it. See you next time. Cheers.